I woke early the next day with deviance in mind. Kissing Jill on the forehead, I slipped from the bed. I headed straight for the basement to check on our latest acquisition. The skin I had peeled back the previous day was turning hard and drying out. Grabbing a water flask, I moved over to her. She was as still as death, but I could see her shallow breathing. Gently, I placed my hand behind her head, tilting it. She flinched. She'd have started thrashing some more if she had any strength left. Now rendered blind, she was even more at our mercy than before. Holding her head upright, I placed the flask to her lips and made her drink till she was choking on the water. There, there, I cooed, carefully laying her head back down. I checked the wounds for signs of infection and was relieved to find none. Wanting to surprise Jill, I left the house and headed back into New Orleans to find a playmate for Rebecca. The streets were damn near empty this early as I parked my van. I debated with myself over the type of specimen I required. Torn with indecision, I decided to let the dice pick for me. Evens, female. Odd, male. I always carry a pair of dice in my pocket. I got out of the van, took a few paces, stopped, took the dice from my trouser pocket, cupped my hands, shook the dice vigorously, crouched down, and rolled them on the sidewalk, like a gambler on the tables of Vegas. I was so glad Rebecca was going to have a new friend. As the morning drew on, I sipped some coffee and watched the alleyways and streets for a good prospect. I knew all the best spots to hunt. I was so tickled by the idea of a nice young man to compliment Rebecca, akin to her Barbie, or should that be an Adam to her Eve. I nearly snorted into my coffee over that piece of good humor when I spotted him. There he was, my fine young hero. Late 20s, he was picking through some garbage, rubbing sleeper, maybe a high from his eyes. Skinny, he was already sweating and pasty. I guessed he was coming down from last night's high, as the humidity was lighter today. Hey, buddy, I greeted, holding out a coffee and pastry to him. He was so startled by my approach I actually laughed out loud. He looked at my offering like it was poison. If he only knew. What'd you want? He asked, voice hoarse. He looked around wildly for potential threats, just to help. My voice was calm as I waved the food at him. Eat up. You look hungry. I pulled the hand holding the coffee back, and he snatched the food from my left hand, shoving it into his mouth like a half-starved dog. I masked my disgust. We have shelter, my sister and I. I started the spiel. It was so easy, and it was well rehearsed. Sugar, spice, and all things nice, all for the price of free. Irresistible. You got some religious nuts? He asked me, wiping his mouth of crumbs just to lick them off his filthy hands. No, no, no. We were as atheist as Seth MacFarlane and Angelina Jolie. Seth who? You know, Family Guy. Whatever. We're just trying to do our part. Come on. You'll feel better after a shower. He was hesitant, but I held up my hands and shrugged. Your call, pal. No one's going to force you. There really was no need to force anyone, not with the promises we made. When we got to the van, I had him sign our waivers. He awkwardly held a pen and wrote out his name, Conrad, in large kindergarten-style lettering. He muttered something about being illiterate. I was all sympathy and started driving. I offered him a pill. I guess he thought it was Prozac. Anyway, he was away with the fairies by the time we got home. Jill was waiting for me, enjoying coffee and a donut, oozing bright red jelly onto her fingers as she stood on the balcony, watching me deliver her surprise. Jack, you cheeky boy, you are such a devil, she squealed in childish delight and rushed back inside to change into scrubs. I deposited Conrad in the basement. We had only the one metal table, so I chained him to the wall. I went upstairs to change, gave Jill a long, throaty kiss, and went back to planning what to do with our happy couple. Jill urged me to plot in the basement. They need to hear. It's only right. The psychological terror of it will be delicious, she whispered, licking my right ear. I loved this woman. She understood me like nobody else, just as I understood her. It's the kind of bond you only get when you've shared a womb. Back in the basement, Rebecca was awake, but clearly confused. After all, in one day, she had lost what few scraps of freedom her various addictions had left her, together with her vision. But, I reasoned, given what we were about to do to her, it was probably better for her that she couldn't see. I laughed silently. His name is Conrad. He's 25 or so. He's not very smart, so he's lost track. Might be closer to 28, but the streets are so hard on people. Conrad was still out for the count. I lifted his eyelid and flashed the light across the pupil to test the response rate. Wish we could just cut something off and count the rings, like a tree. Jill ran her finger over Rebecca's ankle. Rebecca visibly shuddered at the contact. She's blind. We could stitch them together. We did that last year, I replied, shaking my head. After a long pause, I said, we could take a page out of great-great-grandma's book. Jill turned to me, intrigued, and arched her left brow. You know, she used to drill holes into heads and then stir the brains around with a knitting needle. We could do something similar. I've always wanted to give a lobotomy, Jill confessed to me. Rebecca whimpered pathetically. Let's make zombies, I shouted with joy as I rushed over to my tools. We gave Rebecca more time to rest. We didn't want the stress of neurological surgery to kill her before we'd had our fun. Taking her down from the table, we bandaged and cleaned her wounds. Then we put a nightgown on her and settled her into a wheelchair. She made me think of Joan Crawford and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I chuckled to myself. It took the two of us to haul Conrad up onto the table. Jill cut his clothes off and strapped him down as I tested and arranged my surgical tools. Then she shaved his head, making a disgusted noise over the lice she found, and cleaned up the area for me. Doctor, you're brilliant, I told her, pulling my mask up over my face. Thank you, Doctor. I know. She winked at me and set up the camera. I scalped him first. I was hopeful he would wake up mid-surgery. When he didn't, though, I carried on, setting the slab of flesh aside in a metal basin next to me. As I revved up the drill, Rebecca let out a pathetic cry from across the room. I looked at Jill. Jill looked at me. We both grinned at each other. Sprinting over to her, Jill's voice was loaded with concern. "Don't worry, it isn't for you," she soothed, putting her right hand on Rebecca's head and gently combing it through her hair. Then she erupted into a full-bodied Betty laugh. I punctured a fair-sized hole in Conrad's skull to give us access to the frontal lobe. Unexpectedly exposed, his brain twitched and pulsed at me like a child caught with his hand in a cookie jar. Chunks of skull joined the skin in the basin. Unable to help myself, I pressed my forefinger into the squishy membranes and watched the man's face twist and writhe. Like a child with Play-Doh, I pushed and prodded a few more times, careful not to puncture the brain. "Jill, your turn." I stepped away and took over the camera as she dipped her tools into the man's skull and severed the connection to the prefrontal cortex. She mouthed, counting each one, making sure not to do too many, lest the man die. "Do you want to leave it open?" I asked her. "What a fun idea! Sew the skin back on, but leave the skull out." She was giddy at the thought. "Watch this," I smirked. I took a fan and turned it on. Pointing it to a patch of flesh I'd left undone. The skin puffed out like a balloon. Jill's laughter was infectious as she clapped in delight at my morbid wit. Conrad woke up eventually, a few hours later. He groaned in pain and squirmed like a jellyfish, but he didn't seem to notice his surroundings. We were good hosts and hospitably fed him and gave him water. Then we instructed him to feed Rebecca, the blind girl in the wheelchair. We pinched him every time he went to touch his head to keep him from scratching the wound. He remembered us. He remembered his name. But emotion had drained from him like water down a plug hole. "Our first zombie," Jill sighed, hugging me from the side. It was as if we were watching our own children.